Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's Substack Live with the Sustainable Media Center. So, as many of you know, I'm Emma Lemke, and I'm really excited to be joined today by our special guest, Ava Smithing, who does so many different amazing things. But just to name a few, Ava works as the Advocacy and Operations Director at the Young People's Alliance, which is an organization that's really focused on empowering young people to participate meaningfully in civic life and the systems that shape their futures. Ava also serves as the youth fellow at the Center for Media Technology and Democracy at the McGill University. And not only are we lucky enough to hear Ava's insights and all things related to legislating in the digital age and youth activism, but also I'm lucky enough to call her a personal friend. So very thankful to have you on and talking with us today, Ava.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, so today's conversation really is all about youth power, participation, and what is it actually is going to take to move from just young people needing a voice to young people having real influence. So, especially in moments where institutions say that they want youth input, but they don't always know how to meaningfully include it. Ava, I'd really love to start by grounding us though in you and your experience and how you kind of have gotten to the point of asking those kind of critical questions about youth engagement. So, to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey into youth advocacy? What drew you to the work you're doing now, and what ultimately led you to the Young People's Alliance as your outlet?
Yeah, awesome. So I didn't even know that youth advocacy was a thing when I was growing up. I had never even heard of the space. I come into this, I went to business school, or I went to engineering school. I was going to be an engineer. I wanted to make football helmets safer, so I've always been on the humanitarian grind, I guess. But I ended up taking a class in college. I went to engineering school. I wasn't an engineer. Um, and it was on Technopoly by Neil Postman.
Mhm.
And the themes that are explored in any Postman book are just really looking at how technology is something that we're using to entertain and to soothe ourselves, not something that we are using to better ourselves. And I've always been kind of scared of the way that technology was moving so fast. And I always was very in tune with the way that it was separating me from my friends. But I never thought I had a really personal tie-in to what was going on. When I read Postman, I realized that I didn't need a personal tie-in, that everyone was suffering from the same machine, and I got obsessed with it. Would have never thought twice necessarily why I was so obsessed with it until Frances Haugen 2 years later blew the whistle on Meta and released that insane amount, the Facebook files. And she was like, Meta is targeting teenage girls with or with eating disorder content on Instagram. And I think I read that sentence 1,000 times before it really hit me. And I realized, oh my goodness, maybe the reason I care so much about this broad field of making tech safe and using tech for good is because I have actually experienced an incredibly acute harm. And I have actually had, up until that point, lived my life for about a decade with a pretty severe eating disorder, 100% incubated on social media and based off of the content that I was seeing, but also the way that I could pose and put myself out there. So I came into it from a very personal, or first from a societal angle, and then I realized it was personal, and then I kind of zoomed back out again. And after I read the Facebook files, I started doing everything in my power to get into this space. I started stalking people, and I live on a busy corner in DC. The motorcades will go by, so just pretend you don't hear it. But I started stalking people. It's funny because I don't know if I've ever told you this, Emma, but you were one of the first people I found online when I was like looking up this idea of responsible technology, because you were ahead of the curve, like the original youth activist out there in the tech field. So I was like, how can this girl, have a platform to speak about this? But, I have these same thoughts. I want to tell more people about this. And I started going to events in the city because I didn't want to work a consulting job. I really wanted to work in this field. And that's where I met Sam, who's the executive director of the Young People's Alliance, who's my employer now. And I told my personal story of struggling with an eating disorder on social media. And Sam called me after the event and was like, can you please come to North Carolina? We're running this bill. It's about data use and algorithms. And we think that your lived experience would just be perfect to put this over the edge for the legislators. So I said yes. I flew to North Carolina, and he started pushing me into these lobbying meetings. I never lobbied before. Turns out lobbying is just talking to people, and I'm good at that. So he asked me then, the first weekend we'd ever met, if I would move to DC and bring the Young People's Alliance, bring that program from the state to the federal level. And I said yes. So then a week after I graduated from college, I moved to DC and dove headfirst into this world I knew nothing about. Youth advocacy wasn't something that I'd ever thought about, but all of a sudden I was one of the youth advocates in the space. And I mean, then everything changed, and now this is just what I love to do. I feel really, really lucky that Sam identified that I would have a passion for policy and lobbying just based off of my natural ability to do it before I even thought that that was a path for me. And working in the Young People's Alliance has just been so incredible. We do a lot of, like, I'm a direct lobbyist, so I'm a registered lobbyist. My entire job is going to elected officials and telling them what they could do better, what I like about what they're doing, what the young people want, and pushing for change. So we work on the Kids Online Safety Act. We've worked on a lot of data privacy initiatives. In some states, we're really big on the AI companions right now that are isolating users. And all of our advocacy at YPA isn't only my story, but it's just led through the lived experience of young people. We have 1,800 kids now on 55 campuses across the country, and it's the coolest puzzle in the world to figure out how we can give all of those people a voice in these rooms, and how we can make sure that they're able to show up and feel like they're heard.
Mhm. And well, one, thank you so much for sharing. I think I also appreciate you at the end kind of talking about, you know, getting in through social media, and now you find yourself talking about AI companions and chatbots. I think it's so interconnected, and I think the advocacy has a really beautiful arc. Also, for those listening out there who might be academically interested, I read in college "Amusing Ourselves to Death" by Postman, and was also really taken aback by the beautiful kind of narrative reframing that he puts around the medium that is, technology. And also keep in mind, like, I looked it up, this book was written, well beyond the era of social media. So it fits really nicely. So highly suggest people read that, and we'll put it in the show notes. But one thing, you also mentioned at the end is giving young people a voice. So we talk a lot in the community about the difference between performative youth engagement and actual shared power. So, many institutions say they're listening to young people, but the follow through doesn't always match the rhetoric. So, from your perspective, what does like authentic youth engagement really look like? And where do you think institutions and lawmakers often get it wrong?
Yeah, I think I mean, and the reason Sam and Mick, our founders at YPA, founded YPA is because they found when they would go to the Hill in North Carolina, these legislators would entertain them, pretend to be so excited, ask to get a photo with them, post it on their Facebook, and then do nothing. So I'd put that in the performative box, wanting to check young people off of your list. I think it can be really performative because I don't think a lot of elected officials, and understandably so in some cases, don't understand the expertise that is derived from lived experience and see young people's lived experience as valuable in shaping the policy, or as valuable in shaping, like, what harms do we have to fix. Like, this young person is going to tell me that young girls have an eating disorder on Instagram. Okay, cool, thank you, now you can go away, we're going to figure out how to fix it. But
Yeah.
meaningful and true youth engagement is not shooing us away after you figure out the problem, but rather keeping us at the table and asking us, how would you solve this? And I think with online policy specifically, digital natives are so uniquely able to solve problems because we intuitively understand them. I didn't have to take a class on what Instagram is doing to teenage girls. It did it to me. And because I understand this intuitively, I can more creatively problem solve around it and really trace the problems back to their very, very, very root, as opposed to like a downstream thing. And I think a really good example of this is the conversations we're having right now between, removing young people from social media or making social media safer for young people. One of those things, listen to the problems that young people was having and then excluded them from the conversation. The other one of those things, listen to the problems that young people was having and then said, okay, what should we do about it? And that's when you and Zaman came through and were like, safety by design. That's what we need to do, because we don't want you, we do find joy in these products, weirdly enough. We do love them sometimes. I mean, I don't anymore, but at some point in my life I did find true joy on there, and we shouldn't discount that joy. And I think a lot of the performative inclusion of young people across any policy is listening to them when they tell you something is bad and not listening to them when they tell you something is good, or vice versa. It's just selective hearing. Absolutely. I think the Young People's Alliance, we work really, really, really hard to do authentic youth advocacy. And especially at the beginning of our time here in DC, we really were kind of fending for ourselves. I don't think that was necessarily the most productive thing, but it gave us, from the very get-go, like don't want to say a chip on our shoulder, but just a determination to push ourselves into these rooms whether
Yeah.
we wanted to be there or not. I think that the pinnacle of our ability to be listened to by lawmakers was when we testified. And
Yeah.
it wasn't like, we want this young person to come tell their story. It was like, I can talk about data privacy and online safety together.
Mhm.
Who else can do that? Because who else understands the situation so comprehensively and intuitively? And I think that was a really big movement for us in seeing what an effective version of our advocacy would look like. And it is being a little bit unapologetic and saying, no, you don't get it, and you have to be very careful about it. You have to walk 1,000 lines because there is so much excellence that comes from institutional knowledge. But so walking that line is really difficult, but being a little bit arrogant and no, this happened to me. I can tell you what happened. It didn't happen to you. I think finding the line in between being arrogant and confident that what you have to say matters, and then also being able to listen and be okay with listening when people say things that you might not think matters, but staying in the room regardless and continuously saying what you got to say over and over and over and over again. I think is that discipline makes it hard to ignore.
Exactly. And I think that with a lot of individuals who come to me asking you, like, how do you begin to engage in youth activism? I always kind of say, well, specifically in the tech world, you figure out where your expertise lies. And
Yeah.
when you're a tech native, that is your expertise. You are a digital native. You've grown up with these experiences. If social media negatively impacted you, that's your story. You can tell it. Someone can't take that away from you. And I
Exactly.
think that that's kind of an anchoring, it has an anchoring effect because I think I've seen with a lot of other advocates, it kind of grounds them in the confidence they need to your point, enter a room. Because you kind of need a little bit of confidence because it can be intergenerationally really scary.
Yeah. Well, and I skimmed over that. I'm actually really glad you brought that up because that's the hardest part. Learning how to ask somebody to give you something when you know that they do not want to give it to you is very hard. And you have to be really shameless. I had to get pushed in, like physically pushed into my first Hill meeting. I was like, they don't want me in there. I don't have a meeting. They don't want to talk to me. And my organizing director was like, get in the room. And I didn't, I was so physically scared. I froze up outside of the door. He opened the door and used all of his, because I'm 5'11", this Alex is not a very big person. Used all of his power to push me in there. And it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. But every time I did it, it got a little bit easier and a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And there was not really any reassurance from these people that what I was doing was the right thing. The reassurance comes from the other young people in the space. And also you, exactly like you said, finding confidence that, I mean, for me, it was reading the Facebook files. What I believe happened to me did happen to me, and you can't deny that. And, that's why, I mean, this is something completely different, but that's why whistleblowers and lawyers are so important because that hard data that validates lived experience, I think, is really, really crucial for young people in this space because it's hard to advocate for something if no one ever told you that it was real.
Mhm. Exactly. And just pivoting a little bit, at SMC specifically, we spend a lot of time thinking about, the systems that people are navigating, like we've talked about, from technology to media to politics to policy, and how often those systems weren't designed with young people actually in mind. So I'm kind of curious, what trends are you seeing right now and how young people are showing up politically, civically, because I know that that's kind of the bread and butter of the Young People's Alliance. And are there shifts in how they're organizing, engaging, building power that feels important to name?
I think it's nonpartisanship and bipartisanship all the way. I think young people have grown up being incredibly disillusioned by institutional powers that are supposed to protect us. I think a generation of kids who grew up watching their peers, for lack of a better phrase, get shot in their schools online,
Yep.
you can have no expectation that we would believe that Republicans and or Democrats could save us because they haven't. And there's a lot of constitutional issues, blah, 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 that's not the issue we're talking about, but the way we have seen young people's trust being revived is by not belonging specifically to one party, but trying to work in the political system in a new way. A way that gives you agency to work with Democrats, independents, and Republicans, and also a way that gives you agency to build out your own platform.
Yep.
It's really hard to put people in boxes, especially people from our generation who've grown up online, being exposed to so many different levels and kinds of information. We're so unique. Gen Z is not a monolith, and we don't fit in a box. So that's really what
Yep.
we've done at Young People's Alliance is tried to build out a policy platform for young people by young people that doesn't fit in the Republican, that doesn't fit in the Democrat, but is something that everyone can agree on. And it's worked really well. Because especially young legislators too, I think they see the need for that as well. So that would be my trend is our kids on campuses have gotten really excited this year in the
Mhm.
ability to engage
Yeah.
in nonpartisan political building. And I think that's, I mean, kids from states all over are filling out our contact form to start a chapter. So I think that's what I'm seeing is a move away from the parties that have in the past, or we feel like have in the past failed us.
Oh yeah, and I think it's really important to emphasize like the Gen Z isn't a monolith because I think that especially when you grow up with like a For You page for you where
Yeah,
everything is hyper curated specifically to who you are and what you want to a degree. Again, at a certain point, we can talk about like how much of the content that you're given is really what you need. We can
right.
debate that for through and through. But you have this hyper curated environment, and then you're expected to say, here are two camps, pick one and go. So
Exactly.
I think that it's very understandable why you are seeing this generational like pushback isn't even a strong enough word, kind of like retaliation against the party system.
It's like a
Um,
disdain for the party system.
yes.
It's like well, and the algorithms as we're talking, they push you to the most extreme parts of the party. So there's so much of our generation that feels morally illegitimate because they don't
Yeah.
fit into one of the extremes, and they
Mhm.
don't. And they're like, wait, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I believe in. I feel like I'm a bad person because I'm not over here or I'm not over here. And
Mhm.
that's the home we're creating, and that's the trend we're seeing is kids want that. They're like, please, somebody, they just want to be understood. We
Yeah.
see you, we believe in your passion for politics, your passion for whatever it is, and there is a place for you in here. You don't have to fit into this.
Exactly. And I think that that's tech is a great place to start when having that conversation because one, I think almost anyone that I've talked to who's in Gen Z, there's an acute understanding through lived experience of the pitfalls of social media. But to your point, you've already mentioned this with like a ban versus like safety by design. Like there's a large array and a diverse array of ways that you can attack the issue. So where you stand on it can be like very nuanced and interesting. But again, it doesn't necessarily fall into like a political camp.
Exactly.
I think that the tech world, I think, is really inviting for individuals who want to begin to explore in a cool and nuanced, holistic way what their political beliefs are without being forced into those binaries.
Absolutely, yeah. I've learned a lot about my person. I mean, you learn a lot about your personal politics when you move to Washington D.C., but like for better or for worse, whether you wanted to or not. But I do feel like I've learned a lot, and that's you see the like freaking Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn probably don't
Mhm,
agree on anything else,
mhm.
and it's cool. I do love to watch that, and that it does breed hope. I think I'm more hopeful now, shockingly, after I've been working in DC for over 2.5 years, than I was before I moved here because I did see that there were at least some people who are willing to work across the aisle.
Mm. And I want to talk a little bit about like sustainability and that idea because it's so central to what we do at SMC. Because youth-led work is powerful, but it can also, let's be honest, it can be exhausting. So, how do you think about supporting young leaders in ways that don't just ask them to show up, but that also really protect their time, their labor, and their well-being? Because I know we talked about this as youth advocates in the past, like being in that advocacy perspective, oftentimes I get asked a lot, like, do you engage in burnout? How do you keep going when, especially when it's you're up against tech giants? It feels like a David and Goliath
The
situation. But
biggest companies that
yeah,
ever existed ever.
yes. So I think my question for you also is, what do you say to an up and coming youth activist who's excited to get into the space, who we were talking about earlier on this call, this new era and wave of excitement around the topic is coming. What do you say to that activist who wants to jump in but is a little nervous and scared about the realities that come with youth activism?
Yeah, well, I would definitely ask them first to reflect really hard on why they want to get into this space and feel comfortable with that.
Hmm.
Because you go back to that why all of the time.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say is work and organize amongst your peers. So it's really the Young People's Alliance has been so rewarding to me for so many reasons. We've built so many incredible relationships with just absolutely brilliant people who have been in this field for a very long time. But I'm the oldest person at the organization. I'm 24 years old. They call me grandma. It's not very nice, but it's being able to be around people who have had the same and similar, but also vastly different experiences than me, but are all in that same cohort.
Mhm.
It allows us to think really outside of the box.
Mhm.
And having that as your main apparatus and who cares about you. And, like at the Young People's Alliance, we have very, very flexible, if you need to be out of the office, because we understand, because we all are in that same spot. If you need to
Yeah.
go home, if we're on recess, I can go back to Nashville and I can work from home and I don't have to be here. And that is so important to me. I
Mhm.
think working with people who really understand you and are also young people trying to elevate each other's voices is the number one. And there are so many amazing youth led groups out there, many of which are represented in the Gen Z board members you guys have. But don't be afraid and don't isolate yourself then to only other people your age. The
Yeah.
biggest, the support I have gotten from my mentors has just been life changing to me.
Mhm.
And not every mentor you're going to get is perfect, and it's really difficult to find. So don't be afraid if it doesn't work out, like you owe somebody something. But I would urge you to find someone who has been in the space for longer than you and who has a much different perspective than you, just so you guys can talk about the way that things are versus the way that they were, and you can feel heard and understood and just get really, really good advice. Because, as the Young People's Alliance, only working with young people, sometimes we don't think of things because we weren't around when they happened, you know what I mean? Or we don't have someone with 10 years of experience. So being able to also have a mentor is just invaluable because they can help you professionally, but also super personally. I mean, my mentor, God bless his soul, I email him crazy things sometimes. I'm like, this, you know what I mean? I'm moving. I was like, I'm quitting my job. I hate it here. And it's really nice to be met with somebody who has already had that thought 200 times over and never quit and is now at the tail end of their career tell you, like, yes, it is very hard and you're going to get through it. I think that's really good. Yeah, I also just think before you get into it, know whether or not you're comfortable sharing your story. Because
Yep. Yep.
people will ask you to share your story. And you need to make the decision before you ever even get in that room as to
Yep.
whether or not you're comfortable doing it. Because you could get into a position, and I think that Emma and I are maybe about the foremost experts of being 20 something years old and having this social media story thing happen. But after you say it one time, it's expected again and again and again and again and again. And that's really exhausting. And you don't
Yeah.
realize it's really exhausting because you feel really empowered and people give you really good feedback and you feel amped up when you leave. But then, like for me, I'm sharing an experience with an eating disorder, and then I'm going back to my house and I'm having still lingering residual thoughts of the eating disorder, and it's
Yep.
impossible for me to then tackle what I'm dealing with now because
Mhm.
my mind has put it in a box and been like, this
Oh
is the
yeah.
thing that you are
Yeah.
valued for, so that I can't address it in the real time. So
Mhm.
I would just get set on what you're willing to share, and also make sure that you have a line of communication with someone who knows that you're not going to be perfect on that. My
Yeah.
co-associates, my first year at the Young People's Alliance, when I first started sharing the story, Neil and Andrew were my angels because I told them, I communicated with them very clearly at the beginning. I'm like, I talk about this as if it's in the past. It's not always in the past. And they were like, heard, we got you. And then they were always looking out for me. And if I needed to step back, if they needed to cover for me, if they needed to go grab me something, they would. So I think it's all about support and being really, really clear with yourself before you get started with what kind of support you're going to look for and what you're asking from yourself. Because not everybody has to be the one who shares their story. That's the beauty of youth activism, is that you can be on a team with a bunch of young people and not be that person and still have
Yep.
just as valuable of a role. I was the one who was sharing my story, but our research director was the one who had to rip through 14 pages of my testimony, of my personal story, and go through and cite everything and add facts. Like, that is
Yeah.
not as glamorous as being the one testifying, but that was the role for him, and that's the one that he
Yeah.
wanted to take and felt passionate about. So it's just a lot of know thyself, and that's really hard online when you grow up without really an identity because you consume a lot of content. But
No.
um, some serious staring at a wall self reflection stuff.
I totally agree. It always makes me laugh because, in a past life, I did a lot of, I always called it my logging off period, which is when it was deep reflection. And part of being a youth activist was always for me figuring out, where is the boundary? Because I completely agree with you. The second that I opened up and started to talk more specifically about like eating disorder related experiences, like to your point, people will push. People want to know as much information as possible, and they are intrusive. So you have to say to yourself as a young person, where is the line? And I want to totally emphasize and put an exclamation mark at the end of your comment specifically about being a youth activist and feeling or expecting from yourself the perfection that I think a lot of people project on you. So what I mean by that is if you're a mental health activist, you have great mental health now and you never struggle. You were a tech addict and you never struggle again with addiction. And that's just not how the world works. And it for sure was not my path. So I think that it's just also being really, really careful and kind to yourself and saying, I'm going to be a holistic and realistic advocate, which is to say, if I'm going to advocate for change in something I've struggled with, that struggle might not dissipate, but I can find power through my story. I think it's kind of a huge reframing, but I think it is important to be upfront and honest with the other youth activists who are listening or in the space and saying, your perfection isn't expected of you just because you begin to
Yeah.
speak up.
Well, yes, that was so eloquently said. And the other thing is your lived experience does matter. I think a big part of what this space, I don't want to say has gotten wrong because it has been necessitated up until now. We focus a lot on really acute harms that oftentimes end in the loss of life or hospitalization. You are harmed online if you spend more time than you want to spend on there. You are
Exactly.
harmed online if you feel slightly worse when you get off. You can join this movement, and I think it's really difficult for people on the outside to look and maybe feel as if they can relate because they're like, well, it wasn't that bad for me. So I don't have a place in there. And that's not the case. That's
Yeah.
not the case at all. Politicians, the lived experience that matters the most to them is death, yes. And that's really, really hard to deal with
Yeah.
as someone who is here. But like your lived experience matters a lot and it has made you who you are and it does inform your advocacy, whether you say it out loud or not. And you just that whole the side by side comparison of that person had it worse, this person had
Yeah.
it better. Fake news, it's so subjective. It literally does not matter at all. Everyone's perspective is confined to their own reality and therefore as bad as it could have been for them because they don't know
Yeah.
anything else. And
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing with talking about lived experience too is we do get into like a little bit of, oh, let me romanticize how horrible my life was, and it's it's not that great. And it also like it sucks that a lot of people only want to pay attention to people who are willing to get that graphic and in the nitty gritty horrible details because that's not the only lived experience that matters. And when we only talk about that lived experience, we have bad policy decisions. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
not any policy specifically, but when we don't get a comprehensive picture, we make skewed decisions.
Yep, absolutely. And talking about, the policy landscape and then ending with that, I want to zoom out for a moment at our current landscape. And, I want you to tell listeners maybe a bit more about the specific work that you as an individual or at YPA you're most excited for going into 2026 because oh my gosh, there's a lot to cover, there's a lot to do, but I think I have felt an acute excitement for 2026 because I feel like gears are turning. And I'm curious on where you think there's the greatest potential for movement in the space.
Yeah, I think the greatest potential for movement in this space is kind of piggybacking off of my last answer, but including more people other than just people who were directly harmed.
Yeah,
And looking outside of acute social media harms, outside of acute chatbot harms, but looking at just like tech wants to use its money and power to control and surveil people. We don't want that. What are we going to do? And
yeah,
starting to look at it as like this isn't about this isn't about misinformation, this isn't about sextortion, this isn't about blah blah blah. This is about the entire system and how tech is allowed to do whatever it is that they
yeah,
want. This is about, you know, people in Minneapolis getting shot and Tim Cook showing up to the White House and being like, I love it here, and there's no accountability there. So for
yeah.
2026, that's what I'm honed in on is how are we going to increase salience of this issue? How are we going to connect it to affordability? How are we going to connect it to opportunity? The Young People's Alliance has done a really big project on reclaiming the American dream and specifically focusing on affordability, opportunity, and community. And instead of saying like, here are these AI issues we care about, it's like, here are these issues that you, the person, cares about, and here's how AI is going to make those worse or change them. So it's
Mhm.
looking at it more comprehensively. I also think on the policy side, I mean, girl, it's like it's a lot, but I think
Yeah.
watching how Australia and other countries react to the enforcement of the ban is going to be very,
Yeah.
very interesting in the developments we're going to see in age assurance technologies there, whether it works, whether it doesn't work. I'm keeping a close eye. I think the AI moratorium, so the
Yeah.
administration and the tech companies have tried time and time again to prevent the states from being able to write laws about AI, prevent local governments. My favorite part of our government is federalism, okay? That's not, and that's obviously, like I said earlier, a very clear attack from tech on the rights and abilities of the government and citizens to do what they want and have agency and liberty in their lives.
Mhm.
But the reason I'm excited for that, Emma, is because it's such a show of cards. It is
Yeah.
saying, we don't want you involved on this. We do want to control power. And I have a lot of faith in our population, and I have a lot of faith in the people working in this movement to effectively communicate that to everybody else. And to me, it's like tech can't walk that back. They have
Yeah.
already made it very, very clear that they do intend to disenfranchise people from being able to legislate and regulate their products and keep them safe. You can't walk that back. That's
Yeah.
out there. As Emma Lemke once said, the genie is out of the bottle. You can't put it back in. So I'm kind of excited to, or I am very excited to do with that what we will and use that as a communication point to talk to the public about what's going on. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the moratorium is very bad, and playing defense is not as fun as playing offense.
Right.
But that's big for 2026, and it's going to come out in a bunch of new ways. I think we're going to see tech companies playing a lot of offense legislatively. So I think
Yep.
we're going to see tech companies introducing their own versions of bills in states and in the federal government and telling legislators that they were vetted by civil society or that they're better. And, I think we're going to see more of that, which is problematic. But again, when they do things like that, it makes it much easier for us to turn around and show the public, why that's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my big. I also think in the policy space we're going to see. Maybe I'm speaking this into existence. Maybe I'm predicting it. I don't know. But I'm excited for 2026. A return to focusing on the liberty of the individual.
Yeah.
Our legal system is so stacked against individuals because for so long, you go way, way back. At one point, a third of Americans were in unions, and it made sense that we had specific laws in place to protect corporations from those unions.
Yeah.
Now, less than 10% of Americans are in unions, and it doesn't make any sense that our corporations have so much protection against the right of the worker, against the right of the user. So I think my hope for 2026 is that we see a veer back towards legislation that really focuses on restoring liberty to individuals, like on an individual basis, and gives them a direct action, dare I say, a private right of action to go after these companies. And that might be controversial, but I think that's the way to go because that increases buy-in on the people on the grassroots side because they have a stake in this game, and also on the company is going to be like, don't do that. You can't let the people sue us, and it's like the people aren't going to sue you unless you're doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
So caught you. I think we're going to get into some fun, really consumer focused consumer protection stuff, which is going to be cool. And I think kids online safety will continue to push forward, but I think it will be joined by much more.
Yeah. Yep, I totally agree. And I have kind of two comments. One, I think that I love how you kind of talked about like preemption and specifically how you were discussing it can suck to be on the defense. But to your point, the cards that are being played, that the lines that are clearly being drawn are giving us more material to be on the offensive attack and to mobilize more people in the movement, to go beyond just the movement and to go into public discourse and to say, do you find this acceptable? No, let's do something about it. So I think that while we are leaning into defensive plays, I think it's providing greater offensive materials. Um,
Exactly. Well, and the
and
trials that are going on now all over the country, the discovery is going to be invaluable. And I'm
ex
guilty. I listened to former FTC Commissioner Bedoya talk today, so I'm like extra feeling this like antitrust, like, and you know what I mean? I'm definitely feeling this extra like lawyerly, very FTC vibe. But I was inspired by what he said and talking about restoring the focus on the consumer and making sure that the consumers have the tools they need to push back against corporations because, well, I could just go on and on and on. So
No, but I want to thank you because I think everything that you've been saying is so valuable and you're so eloquent, but also I think that you have a great warmth to you, especially when it comes to youth activism. And I think so many people are inspired by what you bring and what you show. And for everyone who is listening, again, Ava works for the Young People's Alliance, so please go in and look at their materials. They again produce great reports and just great mobilization efforts. And we're so excited for next week's conversation and tune in again then. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.